Princess Larina sat on the edge of the grand balcony, staring at the endless skyline of the Xilari Empire's capital. Towering spires of silver and glass stretched into the sky, their surfaces reflecting the golden glow of the twin suns. The city was alive with the hum of hovercrafts and the distant sound of music from the royal gardens. It was a world of beauty, power, and tradition. A world where she did not belong. Lyrena was small, too small for a Xilari noble. Her people were tall, strong, and built for war, their bodies covered in elegant patterned scales. They valued strength above all else, and Lyrena had none of it. Her frame was delicate, her scales lighter and softer than those of her towering sisters. Where her siblings were warriors, she was quiet, bookish, and considered weak. And because of that, no noble house wanted her. Tonight was supposed to be her betrothal ceremony. It was a grand tradition where noble males would compete for the right to take a princess as their mate. The hall had been filled with powerful warriors, leaders of great houses, all seeking alliances. But when her name was called, the room had gone silent. Not a single male stepped forward. Lyrena had watched as her father, Emperor Xeltor, sat on his throne, his expression unreadable. Her sisters exchanged knowing looks, some pitying, others amused. The whispers began soon after. No one wants the fragile one. She is too small to carry a warrior's blood. She is a disgrace to the imperial line. The words burned in her mind as she clutched the balcony railing. She should have been used to this by now. She had always been different, always overlooked. But tonight had been the final proof. She was unwanted. A soft gust of wind carried the scent of blooming Xerix flowers, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside her heart. A voice broke the silence behind her. "You should not linger here alone, daughter." Lyrena turned to see her father stepping onto the balcony. Emperor Xeltor was a massive figure, his dark emerald scales shining under the twin moons. His eyes, golden and piercing, studied her carefully. She bowed her head. "Apologies, father." He stepped closer, standing beside her. "You are troubled." Lyrena let out a hollow laugh. "Is that not expected? I was humiliated in front of the court." The emperor was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "You are not humiliated. Those who refuse to see your worth are the ones who should feel shame." Lyrena turned to him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "But no one wanted me. That means I have no value." Her father frowned. "Value is not measured by the strength of one's arms, Lyrena. You have a different kind of strength, one that the Xilari are too blind to see." Lyrena clenched her fists. "Then why does it feel like I am nothing?" The emperor did not answer immediately. He looked over the city, his expression distant. "The universe is vast, daughter. There are those beyond our world who see things differently." She frowned. "Aliens?" "Yes," he said simply. "Humans, for example. Their ways are unpredictable." Lyrena had heard of humans. They were a young race, new to the galactic stage, yet they had already become infamous for their stubbornness and ability to survive against stronger enemies. The Xilari found them peculiar, some even amusing. "Why mention them?" she asked. Her father gave a small smile. "Because they do not see weakness the way we do." Before she could question him further, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hall behind them. A royal advisor approached, his expression respectful but urgent. "My emperor, the Terran delegation has arrived. Captain David Rains leads them." Lyrena blinked. The humans were here. She had never seen one in person before. She had read reports, seen images, but this was different. Her father nodded. "Let them be welcomed with honor." He turned to Lyrena. "Would you like to see for yourself what the humans are like?" Lyrena hesitated. Part of her wanted to hide in her chambers, away from the whispers and the pitying looks of the court, but another part of her was curious. Maybe, just maybe, these strange aliens saw the universe differently, and maybe, for the first time in her life, someone would look at her and not see a failure. With a deep breath, she nodded. I would like to meet them. Lorena stood at the edge of the grand hall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The towering pillars of the Scifi palace stretched high above, their silver patterns glowing faintly under the soft light of the chandeliers. Rows of noble warriors, dressed in elaborate robes, lined both sides of the hall, their expressions calm but watchful. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Tonight, the humans had arrived. The massive doors at the far end of the hall swung open with a deep, echoing sound. A wave of murmurs rippled through the auxiliary nobles as the delegation stepped inside. Lorena's heart beat a little faster. Humans. They walked with confidence but not arrogance. Their uniforms were sharp, a deep navy blue with golden insignias on their shoulders. Unlike the Xilari, who were covered in scaled skin, the humans had soft flesh. Their faces were smooth, their eyes sharp and full of intelligence. At the front of the group was their leader, Captain David Rains. Lorena studied him carefully. He was tall for a human but shorter than most Xilari males. His dark brown hair was neatly cut, and his sharp blue eyes moved across the hall with quiet observation. He didn't look intimidated, nor did he seem overly proud. He simply walked with purpose. The Emperor stepped forward to greet them. "Captain Rains," he said in a deep, powerful voice. "Welcome to the Xilari Empire." Rains bowed slightly at the waist, a respectful gesture. "Emperor Exceltor, we are honored by your welcome." His voice was steady, strong. "The Terran Republic hopes this meeting will bring understanding and friendship between our people." Lorena watched as her father nodded approvingly. Most alien leaders either feared the Xilari or acted with false bravado. But Rains, he treated them as equals. The conversation moved forward, with both sides exchanging formalities and discussing trade agreements. Lorena listened quietly, unnoticed as always, until Rains' eyes met hers. It was only for a second, but she felt it. Unlike the Xilari nobles who barely acknowledged her presence, Rains looked at her with curiosity. Not judgment, not pity, just simple curiosity. She quickly turned away, pretending to study a nearby tapestry. But her mind raced. Did a human truly look at her? A meeting of two worlds. As the discussions ended, the Emperor raised a hand. "Tonight, we celebrate the meeting of our people. Let there be food, music, and conversation." The nobles clapped politely, and the hall transformed into a grand feast. Plates of exotic dishes filled the tables, and musicians played soft melodies in the background. Lorena took a seat near the edge of the gathering, as she always did. And then something unexpected happened. Captain Rains walked toward her. The murmurs around the hall grew louder as nobles noticed. Xilari warriors exchanged glances. Why would a human approach the unwanted princess? Lorena straightened as Rains stopped in front of her. "Princess Lorena, correct?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He smiled slightly. "Would you mind if I joined you?" She blinked. No one had ever asked her that before. Not nobles, not warriors. She had always been invisible. Yet this human was asking to sit beside her. After a moment, she gestured to the empty seat. "You may." Rains sat down, setting his drink on the table. "Your empire is impressive. The architecture, the traditions, it's fascinating." Lorena tilted her head. "Most aliens find our customs intimidating." Rains chuckled. "Humans tend to be stubborn about such things. We don't scare easily." She studied him. His tone was casual, but there was something deeper in his eyes, an understanding. "Why did you come to sit with me?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Rains took a sip of his drink before answering. "Because everyone else in this room looks at you like a ghost, like you don't belong." Her breath caught. "I've seen that look before," he continued, "among my own people. Those who are different, those who don't fit the mold, they get pushed aside." Lorena looked down at her hands. "Among the Xilari, strength determines worth. I was born too small, too fragile." Rains nodded thoughtfully. "Funny. In human culture, Some of the strongest people I know aren't the biggest or the toughest. Strength isn't just muscles and war. It's surviving when the odds are against you. It's standing up when the world tells you to stay down. Larina's heart pounded. No Xilari had ever said such words to her. But this human, this outsider, spoke as if he saw her. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. The whispered shock of the court. Around them, the nobles whispered. Some watched with open shock, others with suspicion. A human showing interest in the unwanted princess. It was unheard of. Larina's eldest sister, the powerful and respected General Xilara, narrowed her eyes from across the room. She leaned toward one of the advisors. Why is a human speaking to her? The advisor hesitated. It is unclear, my lady. Perhaps he does not understand her status. Xilara's expression hardened, or perhaps he sees something we do not. Meanwhile, the emperor watched the scene in silence, his golden eyes deep in thought. Larina had been invisible to her own people for so long. But tonight, in the presence of a human, she had become someone. And for the first time, she wondered, if a human could see her worth, why couldn't her own people? As the music played and the feast continued, she found herself smiling. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Larina sat in the garden courtyard, the cool evening breeze brushing against her scales. The distant hum of the city filled the air, blending with the gentle sound of flowing water from the carved fountains. The grand feast had ended, but the whispers of the court still lingered in her mind. For the first time in her life, someone had truly seen her, a human. Captain David Rains had spoken to her as if she mattered. He had not ignored her like the auxiliary nobles, nor had he looked at her with pity. Instead, he had treated her like an equal. She could still hear his words. Strength isn't just muscles and war. Strength is standing up when the world tells you to stay down. Larina exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the smooth stone bench beneath her. Why did those words affect her so deeply? Princess. She turned sharply. Rains stood near the entrance, his expression calm but curious. He had changed into more relaxed attire, his navy blue jacket removed, revealing a simple dark shirt underneath. Larina straightened. Captain Rains, may I join you? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. You may. Rains walked over and sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He looked up at the Xilari night sky, the twin moons casting a soft glow over the garden. You left the feast early, he noted. Larina gave a small shrug. I am not needed there. He frowned. From what I've seen, the court underestimates you. She turned to him. Why do you care? Rains thought for a moment before answering. Because I know what it's like to be underestimated. Larina's brow furrowed. But you are a captain. A leader. He chuckled. That wasn't always the case. When humans first entered the galactic stage, we were called weak, fragile. We had no great empire, no legendary warriors. The larger species thought we wouldn't last. Larina listened closely. She had read reports of humanity's rapid rise in the galaxy, but hearing it from Rains himself was different. But we survived, Rains continued. Not because we were the strongest, not because we had the best weapons, but because we refused to give up. He glanced at her. That's why I find your people's view on strength interesting. Larina sighed. Among the Xilari, tradition rules everything. Bloodlines, power, physical strength, these things determine worth. I was born different. Small. Useless. Rains shook his head. I don't believe that. She blinked. Why? He smirked. Because you don't seem useless to me. Her heart pounded at his words. No one had ever said such a thing to her. She quickly looked away, focusing on the fountain's rippling water. Rains leaned back slightly. You know, there's a human tradition we have during formal events. It's called dancing. Larina tilted her head. Dancing. He nodded. It's a way for people to connect. It's not about strength or status, just movement and trust. Lyrena hesitated. I do not know how to dance. Rains smiled. Then let me teach you. She stared at him, unsure. The idea of being seen, of standing in the open, made her nervous. But a part of her, small yet growing, wanted to try. Slowly, she stood. Very well. Rains rose with her and extended a hand. Trust me. Lyrena looked at his outstretched hand. No Xilari male had ever reached for her, never offered her a choice. For the first time, she took it. A dance in the moonlight. Rains guided her to an open space in the courtyard. The soft glow of the twin moons bathed the garden in silver light. He placed her right hand in his left and gently positioned her other hand on his shoulder. It's simple, he said. Just follow my lead. Lyrena focused, her steps stiff at first. But Rains moved with ease, guiding her in slow, steady motions. Relax, he said softly. Feel the rhythm. She tried, adjusting to the movement. It was strange, but not unpleasant. As they moved, she realized something. She wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worrying about what others thought. She wasn't concerned with tradition or failure. She was simply existing. A soft chuckle escaped Rains. You're getting the hang of it. Lyrena allowed herself a small smile. It is not terrible. He laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. For a moment, the world faded away. No court, no whispers, no expectations, just the sound of distant water, the soft touch of hands, and the quiet rhythm of movement. Then, a sharp voice shattered the peace. What is the meaning of this? Lyrena froze. Standing at the garden entrance was her eldest sister, General Xilera. Her imposing figure, covered in dark emerald scales, radiated disapproval. Behind her, several nobles stood, their eyes filled with shock and confusion. Rains slowly released Lyrena's hands, stepping back but keeping his posture firm. Lyrena turned to Xilera, forcing herself to stand tall. We were dancing. Xilera's golden eyes narrowed. Dancing. With a human. Rains met her gaze calmly. It's a form of expression. A peaceful one. Xilera's expression darkened. The court already speaks of this. Humans' interest in you. And now this. She turned to Lyrena. You shame yourself. Lyrena clenched her fists. The familiar sting of rejection burned in her chest. But before she could speak, Rains did. With all due respect, General, he said, his voice steady. I don't see anything shameful about treating someone with respect. A tense silence filled the garden. The nobles murmured among themselves. No one had ever spoken in Lyrena's defense before. Not like this. Xilera's gaze flickered between Rains and Lyrena, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The nobles hesitated before following. Lyrena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was dangerous. Rains smirked. So was dancing with a princess. Lyrena looked at him, truly looked at him. And for the first time she realized, this human wasn't afraid of standing beside her. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't afraid anymore either. Lyrena sat alone in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the polished silver mirror. The soft glow of the twin moons streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. She had always been alone, unwanted, invisible. But tonight, something had changed. A human had seen her. Rains had spoken to her, danced with her, and even defended her against her sister. No Xilari had ever done such a thing. No one had ever dared. She touched her fingertips to her palm, where his warmth had lingered. Why does this human treat me differently? Before she could think further, the door to her chamber slid open. A figure stepped inside. Xilera, her eldest sister, the Empire's strongest warrior, stood tall in her dark green battle robes. Her golden eyes gleamed like fire, her expression unreadable. Lyrena straightened. You did not knock. Xilera ignored the remark and stepped forward. You were seen with the human again. Lyrina met her gaze without fear. I was. Silara studied her, then crossed her arms. Do you know what the court is saying? That you have disgraced yourself. That you have disgraced our bloodline. Lyrina's jaw tightened. By speaking to a human. By letting him stand beside you as an equal, Silara corrected sharply. The nobles mock you. They whisper of weakness. And weakness cannot exist in our empire. Lyrina had heard these words all her life. She had believed them once. But now she wasn't sure. Captain Rains is not weak, she said firmly. Silara's eyes darkened. He is human. Lyrina stood, and humans have accomplished what no Xilari thought possible. They have built alliances, fought wars, and survived against greater foes. You judge them by their appearance, but you refuse to see their true strength. Silara's lips pressed into a thin line. You sound like them. Lyrina lifted her chin. Maybe that is not a bad thing. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to Lyrina's surprise, Silara let out a quiet sigh. You are not a warrior, Lyrina, she said, her tone softer than before. You were never meant to be. Lyrina's heart ached, but she forced herself to hold her ground. Then tell me, sister, if I am not a warrior, what am I meant to be? Silara did not answer. Instead, she turned and walked away. The door slid shut behind her. Lyrina sat back down, her mind racing. For the first time in her life, she had stood up to Silara. And for the first time, her sister had not had an answer. A warning in the shadows. The next day, Lyrina found herself wandering the palace corridors, her thoughts tangled in confusion. Rains had shown her something new, a different way to see the world. But what was she supposed to do with that knowledge? Princess Lyrina. She turned to see an unfamiliar Xilari noble standing in the shadows of the hallway. His long robes marked him as an advisor, but his golden eyes held something else. Something cold. Yes, she asked carefully. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You have drawn much attention, princess. Lyrina narrowed her eyes. And the court does not approve of your association with the human. Lyrina clenched her fists. I do not require their approval. The noble gave a slow, measured smile. Perhaps. But understand this. There are those who will not tolerate such defiance. Even if the emperor allows it, others may not. Lyrina's heart pounded. Are you threatening me? The noble tilted his head. A warning. Nothing more. The empire has endured for centuries because we do not bend. Be careful, princess. Do not let your curiosity become your downfall. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Lyrina exhaled sharply. She knew the court was displeased, but this was different. This was a direct warning. They fear change. For the first time in her life, she realized her existence had never mattered to them before. But now, because a human had chosen to see her, the court saw her as a threat. And that meant she had power. An unbreakable spirit. Determined, Lyrina made her way to the human delegation's quarters. She had to speak with Rains. As she approached, the guards at the door stepped aside. Clearly, her presence had already been noted. Inside, she found Rains seated at a table, looking over a datapad. He glanced up and immediately frowned. Lyrina. He stood. What's wrong? She hesitated, but only for a second. The court is watching us. Rains crossed his arms. I figured as much. I saw the way they looked at you last night. Lyrina took a deep breath. They gave me a warning today. They do not want me near you. Rains's expression hardened. Do they think threats will change your mind? She met his gaze. No. A slow smile spread across his lips. Good. Lyrina's heart pounded. He did not pity her. He did not treat her as fragile. He simply believed in her. For so long, she had accepted the role the empire had given her. Too small, too weak, too invisible. but not anymore. She was not a warrior like Silara, but perhaps she was meant to be something else, something stronger. Rains placed a hand on the table, his expression serious. Lorena, you don't have to fight this battle alone. The Terran Republic values diplomacy, but we do not ignore injustice. If you ever need help, you only have to ask. Lorena looked at him, truly looked at him. He was offering her something she had never had before, a choice. She took a deep breath and nodded. Then I choose to stand. Rains grinned. Then we stand together. Lorena had once believed no alien male would ever want her, but a human had chosen to stand by her side. And that changed everything. Lorena stood on the palace balcony, staring out at the capital city of Silura Prime. The towering spires of the imperial structures glowed under the twin moons, their beauty untouched by the struggles hidden beneath. But she saw them now. For years, she had accepted her place, ignored, forgotten, unseen. But now she felt the weight of expectation, the silent threat of tradition pressing against her like a heavy chain. The court did not want her to change, but she was already changing. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned as Captain Rains stepped onto the balcony. "You sent for me," he asked. Lorena nodded. "I need to understand something." Rains leaned against the railing, waiting. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "What makes humans so unwilling to bow?" Rains smirked. "You mean why we don't follow the strongest just because they say so?" She nodded. Rains looked up at the sky, thinking, because strength alone isn't enough. Power without reason is just control. Back on Earth, we had kings, emperors, warlords, men who ruled because they could. But time and time again, people stood up and said, "No more." Lorena listened carefully. "We value choice," Rains continued. "Freedom. We don't let bloodlines or muscle decide our future. We choose who leads us. And if they fail us, we replace them." Lorena exhaled slowly. That was the difference. The Exilary Empire did not choose. It only followed. She clenched her fists. "I want to change things." Rains studied her. "That's not an easy path." "I know." His gaze softened. "Then tell me, what do you want to do?" Lorena turned back to the city. "I want to be more than just a forgotten princess. I want to prove that strength isn't just power. It's standing for what is right." Rains smiled. "Then you're already stronger than they think." Lorena felt warmth in his words, a quiet support she had never known before. But she also knew the danger ahead. The court was watching. The empire was built on unshakable traditions. And those who defied them often did not survive. A dangerous proposal. The next morning, Lorena stood before the Imperial Council. The grand chamber, carved from polished obsidian, was filled with the highest nobles and warlords of the empire. Golden banners of the Exilari hung from towering pillars, and in the center sat the emperor himself, her father. The council murmured as she stepped forward. She was not expected here. Her father raised an eyebrow. "Lorena, why have you come before us?" Lorena took a breath. "To challenge the empire's traditions." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Several nobles exchanged sharp glances. The emperor's gaze darkened. "Explain yourself." Lorena steadied her voice. "The empire values strength above all else. But strength is more than just power or battle. We have ignored those who do not fit the warrior's mold. We discard those who are different." Her father watched her in silence. She continued, "I wish to propose a new path, one where strength is not just measured by combat, but by wisdom, innovation, and leadership." A noble scoffed. "The weak should not lead." Lorena turned toward the voice. "Then tell me, how many warriors have led us to war? How many times has the empire lost valuable minds simply because they were not strong enough to wield a sword?" Silence. She pressed forward. Our greatest scientists, strategists, and diplomats are ignored because we only value warriors. But an empire is not just a battlefield. It is its people. Her father leaned forward. And what would you have us do? Lyrena met his gaze. Allow a new tradition. A challenge, not of battle, but of mind. Let those who are not warriors prove themselves in other ways. Let us choose our leaders by more than just strength. The chamber erupted into murmurs. Some nobles whispered in agreement, others in outrage. Silara, standing near the emperor, narrowed her eyes but said nothing. The emperor was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. You ask for much, daughter. Lyrena did not waver. I ask for what is right. Her father exhaled slowly. This council will discuss your proposal. Lyrena knew what that meant. They would delay. Stall. Bury the idea beneath centuries of tradition. She had expected this, but she had planted the first seed, and now she had to ensure it grew. A target on her back. That evening, as she returned to her chambers, she felt the shift. The way the guards watched her differently. The whispers that followed her through the halls. She had made enemies today. She was no longer just a forgotten princess. She was a problem. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Rain standing there, his expression serious. You've stirred the nest, he said. Lyrena nodded. Good. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. They won't let this go. You know that, right? She met his gaze. Then I will not let them go either. Rains grinned. Now you sound like a human. She allowed herself a small smile. But deep down, she knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The empire did not change easily, and those who tried to change it rarely survived. The halls of the imperial palace felt different now. The same walls, the same banners, the same guards, but everything had changed. Lyrena had spoken against tradition. She had challenged the empire's core belief that strength alone determined one's worth. And now, she was a target. As she walked through the corridors, the usual whispers had turned sharper. The nobles no longer ignored her. They watched her, their golden eyes filled with something she had never seen before. Fear. She had never been a threat to them before. But now they feared what she might become. An unexpected warning. As she reached the entrance to the garden, a familiar voice stopped her. Princess Lyrena. She turned to see Silara standing behind her, arms crossed. Her sister's expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp as ever. Lyrena lifted her chin. Sister. Silara stepped closer, her tone quiet but firm. You have made dangerous enemies. I know. Silara's golden eyes darkened. Then why do you continue? Lyrena clenched her fists. Because I am right. Silara studied her for a long moment. Then, to Lyrena's surprise, she sighed. You remind me of our mother, she said at last. Lyrena stiffened. Their mother had died when she was young, and the court rarely spoke of her. She was like you. Silara continued. She wanted change. She wanted to make the empire better. Lyrena's heart pounded. What happened to her? Silara hesitated. Then she said. She was silenced. The words sent a chill through Lyrena. Silara took another step forward. If you keep pushing, they will try to silence you too. Lyrena met her gaze. Will you try to silence me? Silara's jaw tightened. I am a warrior of the empire. My loyalty is to the throne. Lyrena's voice was steady. Then I hope you will remember that the empire is not just the throne. It is its people. For a moment, Silara said nothing. Then she turned and walked away. Lyrena watched her go, her mind racing. Her mother had tried to change the empire, and she had paid the price. Would Lyrena suffer the same fate? She pushed the thought away. No, she would not give up. She could not give up. The first attack. That night, Lyrena met Captain Rains in the diplomatic quarters. His expression was serious. I heard about the council meeting, he said. You really don't like making things easy, do you? Lyrena smirked. It would be boring otherwise. Rains chuckled, but his smile faded quickly. Lyrena, they won't let this go. You need to be careful. I know. He exhaled. I've arranged for extra security near your chambers. If anything seems off, you come to me. Understood. Lyrena nodded. Understood. She appreciated his concern. No one had ever cared for her safety before. It was strange, but also comforting. She left the diplomatic quarters and returned to her chambers, deep in thought. But as she reached her door, something felt wrong. The hallway was too quiet. The guards who usually stood watch were gone. Her instincts screamed a warning. She took a careful step forward, and then the lights went out. A shadow moved behind her. Lyrena barely had time to turn before something sharp slashed toward her. She dodged, but the blade sliced through the fabric of her sleeve. A second attacker lunged from the darkness. Lyrena reacted on instinct. She ducked low, kicking out with her foot, sending the figure stumbling back. But she was unarmed, untrained. She couldn't fight them alone. She needed help. Rains. Lyrena spun and ran. She sprinted through the corridors, her heart pounding. The attackers followed, their footsteps echoing behind her. She reached the diplomatic wing and slammed her fist against the security panel. Open the door. The doors slid apart just as a figure stepped in front of her. Rains. His eyes widened in alarm as he saw the danger behind her. Without hesitation, he grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. The doors shut just as the attackers reached them. An alarm blared through the room. Rains turned to her. Are you hurt? Lyrena shook her head, her breath heavy. They tried to kill me. Rains's expression darkened. Then we send a message back. A reckoning begins. The next morning, the palace was in chaos. The attack on Lyrena had been exposed. The emperor called an emergency meeting. Nobles whispered in fear. The council tried to hide their unease. Lyrena stood before them, stronger than before. She looked at her father. Someone within this palace ordered my death. Silence. Her father's eyes were unreadable. Then he said, Do you have proof? Rains stepped forward. We found the bodies of the assassins. They were part of a noble faction that opposed the princess's ideas. The council erupted in arguments. Some nobles looked away, guilty. Others remained silent. Lyrena's voice was clear. This is the empire you have built. One where fear controls power. One where those who think differently are silenced. The emperor studied her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed. You are bold, Lyrena, he said, just like your mother. Her heart clenched. The emperor stood. This discussion is not over. But let me be clear. Anyone who raises a hand against my daughter again will suffer for it. It was not a victory. Not yet. But it was the first step. As Lyrena left the chamber, Rains walked beside her. That was risky. She nodded. Change always is. He gave her a sideways glance. You're not alone in this, Lyrena. For the first time in her life, she truly believed it. She had been the forgotten princess, the invisible one. But not anymore. Now she was something more. And the empire would never be the same. Lyrena stood before the Grand Council once again. But this time, she was not invisible. The nobles, warlords, and high-ranking officials of the Scifi Empire looked at her with wary eyes. The forgotten princess had become something dangerous. The attack on her life had sent a message, but not the one her enemies had intended. Instead of silencing her, they had proven her right. The empire needed change. The final stand. The emperor sat on his throne, his expression unreadable. Lyrena, you stand before this council with bold claims. You have spoken against the traditions of our empire, and yet you live. You have been given protection, yet you still demand more. Tell me, what is it you seek? Lyrena took a steady breath. She had come too far to turn back now. I seek a new path for our people, she said firmly. For too long, strength has been defined by physical power alone. We have ignored those who could lead with wisdom, strategy, and innovation. We have cast aside minds that could make this empire greater. A murmur rippled through the room. Some nobles nodded. Others scowled. A warlord stepped forward, his golden armor gleaming. "And you believe the empire will change just because you say so." His voice was laced with doubt. "Tradition is our foundation. Without it, we fall into chaos." Lyrena met his gaze. "Then tell me, has our strength prevented rebellion? Have our wars made us safer? Have we grown, or have we merely survived?" The warlord hesitated. Lyrena continued, "We can be strong without destroying ourselves. We can be powerful without fear. And we can lead with more than just war." Another noble scoffed. "You speak as if you have the right to decide this." Lyrena's voice did not waver. "I speak as someone who has seen what the empire refuses to acknowledge, and I speak as someone who will not be silent." The emperor studied her. Then he stood. The entire room fell silent. His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight behind his words. "You are not the first to challenge our ways, Lyrena." His golden eyes darkened. "Your mother spoke of change once. She believed in something more. And she was removed." Lyrena clenched her fists. "I know." The emperor's gaze locked onto hers. "And yet you stand here, knowing the price she paid. Are you truly prepared for what comes next?" Lyrena's heart pounded, but she did not falter. "Yes." A long silence stretched across the chamber. Then the emperor did something no one expected. He laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, nor was it mocking. It was something else, something almost approving. "You have fire," he said, stepping forward. "But fire alone is not enough." Lyrena braced herself. The emperor turned to the council. "The princess has challenged our traditions. She claims there is another way." "Very well." He looked back at her. "Prove it." Lyrena blinked. "What?" The emperor's expression was unreadable. "You will be given one cycle. You will take command of a sector and govern it as you see fit. No warlords, no council interference. If you succeed, if your ways make the empire stronger, then we will listen." Lyrena's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had fought for. And yet, the weight of it pressed down on her. One cycle, one chance. If she failed, the empire would never accept change again. "I accept," she said without hesitation. A slow, dangerous smile spread across the emperor's face. "Then let us see what the forgotten princess can truly do." A new beginning. Later that night, Lyrena stood on the balcony of her chambers, staring at the city below. The challenge ahead was immense. The empire had given her the opportunity, but also set the stage for her downfall. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You actually did it." She turned to see Captain Rains leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, a grin on his face. Lyrena exhaled. "I did." He stepped closer. "You realize they expect you to fail." "I know." Rains studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Lyrena raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to try to talk me out of this." He smirked. "Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss this for anything." For the first time in a long time, Lyrena felt something strange. Hope. She had been the princess no one wanted, the forgotten heir. But now she was something more. And she would not stop until she proved that the empire's future did not belong to the strongest. It belonged to those who dared to shape it. The end, or the beginning.